This video will talk about what I call the third era of church history after the apostolic age, after the desert fathers go to the desert and mothers. We get to the third era for this course, which we'll call the conversion of Constantine. We'll go into the early 4th century, and you'll know that by now Rome is a monolithic imperial power. Remember, all roads lead to Rome. There's even been Roman emperors that have claimed the island of Britannia, today Great Britain. And for lack of a better comparison, there'll be occasion to elect a new Caesar. Rome was so big, there was kind of an east and a west part. Think of it that those two people now of the east and west are going to come together to see who could be Caesar. Within still the empire of Rome. Think of it maybe Democrats and Republicans, who's going to be president. So Constantine is going to meet Maximilius, and through a very strange turn of events that I've recorded for you in your handout, you can read the little sidebar. I won't go through it here. The underdog, Constantine, wins the battle, unlikely, and he becomes the Caesar. Later, he will profess that the night before this unlikely victory, he had seen in his dream a vision of the key row. I'll also put an image of that in your handout. In brief, the key row, you might say today CH, the first two letters in the name of Christ. It forms, you've probably seen the symbol. And he saw that symbol for Jesus Christ and heard the words, "By this sign you will conquer." So after the unlikely victory, Constantine gives credit to Jesus, and he becomes a Christian. Now, with a Roman Caesar becoming a Christian, a series of domino steps will happen that changes the course of Western history. I'll go through them in random order. I'm not exactly sure I'll get them in the correct order in your handout, or even if I'll get them all, because this was such a game changer. So what does a Christian emperor of Rome do? Well, for starters, he goes to all the Roman coins and he changes the motto from Caesar est Deus, Caesar is God, to Jesu Christus is God, Jesus Christ is God. Those coins circulate all over the empire. And if your Roman emperor converts to Christianity, what are you likely to do? Convert to Christianity. Secondly, in random order, he'll take that same symbol of the key row, that symbol that was so important to him, and he puts it everywhere. On the coins, on the battle flags, on the shields of his soldiers, in mosaics, in art, in frescoes. The whole country now sees this symbol of Jesus Christ. Because he's unfamiliar with Christianity, he also sends his mother, Helen, back to the Holy Land. The sites of Jerusalem and Bethlehem and Nazareth. Remember, the Romans have been trying to quash for 300 years, obliterate memory of all of that from their land. So Helen goes back after about 300 years and finds the traditional sites of all these biblical areas of the biblical story and marks them. We have them to this day, but it's only the traditional site. Remember, for the first 300 years, people were trying to actively remove all memory of it. Constantine says, look, Christians, you guys can come out from underground, literally, up from the catacombs and worship openly. I declare every Sunday an official holiday in the empire. Nobody has to work. Sunday is a day to worship and rest. Does that sound familiar to this day? That was Constantine. Constantine said, and look, we no longer need pagan temples. We don't want them. How about you Christians use them? So Christians moved their gatherings from homes around tables, and they went and kind of rehabbed, if you will, these pagan temples. They would get rid of the patron goddess of the temple, whatever it be. Let's say it's the temple to Athena. They would destroy the temple, but they would move in And that's why many unlearned people think that early church architecture was Greco-Roman with Corinthian columns and acanthus leaves and vases and valance. No, that wasn't Christian. That was pagan. The only reason it came associated with Christianity is because Christians were invited to move in and to use those erstwhile pagan temples. The first Christian building built specifically for Christian worship we'll talk about in just a bit. It was Constantine who said, well, we have two major festivals of the faith, Christmas and Easter. He's the one who set those dates. Christmas was fixed, December 25. To this day, Constantine did that. And he said, Easter will be a floating holiday. It'll be the first Sunday after the first full moon after spring equinox. And that formula continues to this day. This is all Constantine, what he has done, what he did. He also said, you guys are going to need an administrative center. And so he looked to the ancient city of Byzantium, which was roughly in the middle of the empire, but it's also right there on the continental divide between Asia and Europe. Because he's an emperor, he renames Byzantium Constantinople after himself. And there he builds the first building for Christian worship, the Church of Hagia Sophia, the Church of Holy Wisdom. It's there to this day, but now it's an Islamic mosque. We'll talk about that in a couple of lectures. And in fact, that's where Constantine is buried too, in Constantinople. Okay, he does all of these things and more. They're listed for you in your handout. But the big game changer here you see is that the world now turns from a polytheistic pagan religion system. Remember in middle school social studies when you talked about all those Greco-Roman gods, remember Thor and Zeus and Athena and Poseidon, and you had to remember what were the Greek gods and what weren't the Latin god, the Roman gods. Okay, that whole system is done. It's gone. Almost overnight. Replaced with a monotheistic worship of Jesus Christ and the Trinity. But now the biggest thing that Constantine did. The year now is about 324, maybe 5 to 10 years after his conversion. He says, now that we can talk about Christianity, and now that I'm a Christian, I call a council, because I have questions. There'll be a series of 7 councils. The first was called by Constantine. They met in Nicaea, and his very first question as a new convert is, who is Jesus? Was Jesus another God, lowercase g? Well, no. I just said we got rid of that polytheistic religion. There aren't multiple gods. There's only one. Well, if Jesus was God, does that mean that he was God the whole time, but just kind of put on a human costume? Is that how it worked? Or was it the reverse? Was Jesus just a really good guy that one day God looked on the world and said, well, I'll choose the best of the best, and that's going to be Jesus of Nazareth. And so God kind of adopted him into divinity. The Council of Nicaea will argue this for 2 years. For the first time, they can openly discuss and debate. And be very careful with the words here. They didn't invent the Trinity any more than Newton invented gravity. But what they did do is articulate what the Bible had taught all along, according to a Christian, and that is that God is one who exists in 3 persons, a tri-3 unitas, one. It's where we get the English word Trinity. So Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God in 3 persons, and of the second person of the Trinity, Jesus Christ, they affirm both his 100% humanity and 100% divinity. 2 natures. And if all of that sounds mysterious, that's how they left it. After 2 years of arguing and trying to find analogies and symbols, they finally kind of said, the Trinity is a mystery. And if we could explain a mystery, it would no longer be a mystery. And that's how they left it and walked home. But it is the foundational teaching of Christianity, the Trinity, of how a Christian puts together the teaching of the Bible with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Excuse me. The last of those 7 councils we've also already talked about. Remember the Council of Carthage? After the first question, who is Jesus? One of the last questions is, well, what's our sacred text? And you can remember that from the very first lecture. And what the Council of Carthage did was really strange. They picked somebody else's text to begin with, that of the Jews, and added a second volume or a New Testament to it. But back to our first creed, the Council of Nicaea, the formulation, the articulation of the doctrine of the Trinity, and from that comes another ancient creed of Christianity, the Nicene Creed, see, from Nicaea. And as you might suspect, it is one of the first creeds to kind of go at length to explain the Trinity as a basic Christian doctrine. I put that in your handout as well. Well, what will happen after Constantine's death? There's a couple of other Caesars that will come and try to undo what he did, and then another one that will reaffirm it. As always in history, things are a process, not an event. But nevertheless, we can say that as a result of Constantine, all of these things were introduced into the Western world. Now, to be fair and honest academically, I've kind of told you the rosy picture, the romantic picture. On the battlefield, a Caesar becomes a Christian, and the whole country joins him. There's an alternate reading of Constantine's life that you should know about, just to be fair, and that is, the fact is that he didn't get baptized until he was on his deathbed as a Christian. And then he did some really bad things to his son and his second wife that really makes one wonder if that would be the action of a Christian. So there's another stream of interpretation in history that would say, you know, Constantine's conversion might not have been spiritual. Could have, first of all, been simply for political expediency, because the fact is, by the year 312, 314, this conversion, the fact is that there were so many Christians now, the movement had grown so large, that maybe it was to his political advantage to become one of them and have them on his side. So that's the other reading of Constantine. We don't have to choose, it's not a history course, but I want you to know of both readings, and regardless of the veracity of his conversion, the results will remain the same. What then happens to Rome? You know this from history as well. It'll continue about another 100 years till about the beginning of the 5th century. And there'll be a slow 75-year process where Rome is kind of undone. The fact of the matter is it got too large, too many thousands of miles of borders. One of Rome's ingenious steps, of course, was to invent the road so that they could move produce and people and troops on a road rather than having to rely on river for transportations. And they grew really fast and really big. And so eventually, by the beginning of the 5th century, the Gauls, today we would call them the French, and the Franks and the Vandals come in from the north, and Rome continues to shrink back and pull itself back in, all the way to Rome on that infamous morning when Attila the Hun is ready to sack the city. But the Pope will come out and say, just on the sheer basis of architectural integrity, would you spare the city just for its antiquities? And Attila the Hun agrees, which is why we still have the architectural jewels of antiquity of Rome. But now with Rome gone, the whole world spins into a dark age, confusing age. This is our next era of church history. The Dark Ages is how you might have been taught. The more complicated word is the Secula Obscurum, the age of obscurity. What will replace Rome? Will another religion come forth? Can Christianity hold? In this vacuum of spirituality and politics, there'll be a long era until the world will finally be reborn with the Renaissance. And it's particularly during this era only that the third monotheistic religion could be born in the Arabian Peninsula about the year 571 with the birth of Abdullah Muhammad. The rise of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism will all trace Abraham as their founding father. Islam, in comparison to Christianity, will become almost an immediate success politically and spiritually. It will be the glue that unites all these erstwhile unaffiliated Arabian Peninsula tribes together. It becomes a force. They advance north. They recapture all the holy sites in the Holy Land. The Pope wants to crusade to get it back in a whole other drama. Islam overtakes Constantinople and the Church of Hagia Sophia. They rename the city Istanbul, and they make Hagia Sophia a mosque. It's this new landscape of the world that will begin with the next lecture to see what the Christians will do to unify and organize themselves, even as they have the first major split. And we'll talk then about the next era of church history. But for today, as a way of review, it's been the Apostolic Age, the Desert Fathers, that was the previous lecture. Today, the conversion of Constantine, the Secula Obscura, the Dark Ages after the fall of Rome, and the birth of Abdullah Muhammad. We've learned important words like key role, the symbol of Jesus, Constantine. We talked about all the different things that Constantine did. We talked about tri-unitas, 3, 1, Trinity. And I'll put all of those terms for you as well as you're on your handout. And the next time we'll get together, we'll talk about the first schism, which is a fancy word for break or division in Christianity, and how the church will come out during the Dark Ages and declare the mysterious Middle Age. We'll see you then.